Hi, this is Soul Mechanics, practical tune-ups to be a healthy human, and I'm your host, Kate Foley. When uncomfortable emotions surface, they often come with intensity, especially if you aren't acquainted with them. Unexpressed emotions are kind of like nightmares. If you're not paying attention to them, they'll grow in intensity until you do pay attention. It's important to be present to them, but not to indulge in the story behind them. What do I mean by being present to them? I mean, feel the emotion in your body, not in your mind. Oftentimes we think that we're being present to an emotion, but we're being present to the story accompanying the emotion, and that's why they get so intense. That's why they become cyclical. Visiting the story behind an emotion is sort of like running on a hamster wheel. You keep repeating the same story and the same emotions arise, but you aren't moving anywhere. You're on the same wheel, repeating the same cycle. If we can just sit with them, sit with the feeling and not the story, then they can move on. They might arise again, as they often do. It might take several visits of practicing feeling the emotion in your body and dropping the story. When I'm feeling angry, for example, and my anger is directed at someone, if I drop the story and focus on my anger, guess what happens? My anger doesn't stick around for long. But if I remember and focus on the story, the anger returns. In a different example, if I'm feeling nostalgic, I might say, we have so much fun every time we go to Hershey Park. I might want to go back to Hershey Park, or expect those same people to want to go back to Hershey Park with me and repeat the same fun that we had. I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and that's a big expectation. Maybe I had fun, but they didn't. If I drop the story, the nostalgia sticks around only briefly. Here's the kicker. Emotions are not supposed to stick around, whether they're pleasant or not. You might want to continue to hold on to a nostalgic story, but that's where a pattern begins. If you can let go of the good feeling stories and understand that they too are meant to pass, then you can get into the habit of letting go of the stories that don't feel so good. Some of the time, those stories don't actually exist. They're fiction. We make them up to bolster the emotion. The story is our own narrative, usually based in a belief system we've also created about ourselves. Listen, I'm not telling you to let go of all of your happy memories, or to not be angry at someone who deliberately hurt you. I'm trying to explain the difference between feeling an emotion and attaching to a story. If you've suffered a traumatic event, this is merely an exercise to add to your growing list of tools. This takes a lot of practice, and what actually ends up happening is a shift in your perceptions. This is an exercise. It is not an answer. But continuing with this exercise, try asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? Are there any stories attached to my feelings? If you don't know how you feel, then I suggest Googling some emotional vocabulary lists. Browse through, test them out, see if any resonate. Be honest with yourself. I cannot emphasize this enough. A big issue I often see in my practice is that people are not honest with themselves about their emotions. They think they should feel a certain way, or there are certain emotions that are unacceptable to them. Or, something a bit trickier, some people subscribe to a belief system that their feelings don't matter, and so they walk through their lives focusing on everyone else's feelings rather than their own. Let me tell you though, if the emotions are not acknowledged and expressed, they have a funny way of showing up through external circumstances. People think that life is just happening to them. But when we dig a bit deeper, we discover that there are unexpressed emotions and unacknowledged belief systems wedged behind some mental bedrock. If you're able to identify how you feel, then ask yourself, where do I feel? Place your awareness into your body. You can start by bringing your awareness to your head or your feet, move to your chest, abdomen, pelvis, thighs. You get the idea. You might feel a buzzing or a magnetic pull to an area. You might just get a flash of a word like stomach. You might actually feel a sensation like burning in the muscles of your back, or a warm sensation in your chest, or pins and needles in your foot. A sentence might run across your mind like, I'm shouldering so much responsibility. Or you might feel angry on the right side of your abdomen. Sit with the sensation. Does it have a message for you? Acknowledging our own emotions is challenging enough, but then there are cases of emotional manipulation. There are many examples of this, but one that draws my attention frequently is the national news. I have to take a deep breath before I submerge into any sort of quote-unquote informative media. One has to be very conscious of their own emotional state prior to diving in. If you have any inclination toward fear, or if you are easily swayed by group thought, you are likely to experience the emotional soup du jour. You might even wake up and feel peaceful that day. Then, after reading or listening to the news, you suddenly wonder what happened to that peaceful feeling. Over the years, I've been to social gatherings when someone says to me, "You should be outraged by blank, blank, blank." Feel free to fill in the blanks. Typically, this is a political opinion, but not always. For some reason, it's often the word outrage. If I don't walk away, I cock my head to the side in confusion when someone tells me how I should feel. I get kind of cranky with this subject, especially nowadays when depression and anxiety are skyrocketing. Now we want to add outrage? The only outrage to me is this person emotionally cajoling others around them. Nonetheless, this is emotional manipulation. We have to be very aware of our own emotions to be able to determine when we are being manipulated. If you find yourself attached to any story, wonderful or outrageous, you run the risk of investing your precious energy in something that no longer requires your focus. Not only is this wasted energy, but that story pulls you away from focusing on creativity or action. Instead of creating or acting, you're spinning your emotional wheels needlessly. For example, the person at that party who's outraged and wants everyone else to feel outraged. Are they acting on their outrage? Are they convincing others to act? Are they giving examples of effective and creative ways to enact change? If not, this is just another story. We're hearing a lot about being present-minded these days. This is not just jargon. Pulling your focus into your present circumstances reins in your life force. It's stabilizing. If you're hyper-focused on what you want to happen, that's focusing on the future. If you're dwelling on what you didn't want to happen, that's the past. Focusing on present circumstances will reinforce your physical integrity. It'll calm and center you. You're more likely to feel creative and clear-headed. Your emotions will be more manageable. I'm not telling you to eliminate your goals or that you can't think about the past. This is about indulgence. When you find yourself indulging and cycling in a thought, that's when you can pull yourself back to the present. And believe me, you can. You have control over this. It just takes practice. If you can identify what emotion and where you feel it, you're doing really well. There aren't too many people out there who have healthy body awareness. Our culture feeds and rewards the mind, but our emotions can pull us back into our bodies if we allow them. Our bodies do so much for us. Forceful personalities and unbalanced minds expect our bodies to keep up. When do we listen? Many people get sick or exhausted or injured, and that's when they begin to listen to their bodies. Some people don't even listen then. I've heard very injured, frustrated people say, "I don't have time for tendinitis," or "I have a family to feed. My body isn't my priority right now." Guess what? Your body doesn't care about your schedule or your family. Our bodies care about survival and homeostasis. This includes emotional hygiene. If you're accustomed to bottling your emotions, it's only a matter of time before your body expresses what you aren't. This can surface in 1,000 ways. I don't need to tell you all the many ways we can develop illness. Now, I'm not saying that unmanaged, unbalanced, or unexpressed emotions are always the direct cause of illness, but many times they are. Unfortunately, in this culture, the emotions have been relegated to some invalid, undesirable station. For much of my life, I've heard people in my family, at work, or at school dismiss me and others by calling us too emotional. I don't even know what that means. We're all emotional, all of us. And what's the deal with labeling emotions as negative or positive? No emotion is negative or positive. They simply are. We feel the way we feel. It's the way that we express the emotion that can be perceived as negative or positive. For example, I used to have a friend who was a demonstratively anxious person. Anyone who met him could sense his anxiety immediately. And to top it off, he refused to acknowledge his anxiety. Instead, he saw the world around him as the problem. Even though he didn't acknowledge his anxiety, it was very much expressed in many ways. Incessant complaining, prattling, forcing his will on everyone around him, having meltdowns in situations where he wasn't in control. This could all be perceived as negative. It was certainly draining for anyone around him. But my point here is that the emotions themselves were not negative. It was his lack of acknowledging them and his expression of what he wasn't acknowledging that was perceived as negative. Only in recent years have social scientists called attention to the importance of emotional intelligence. When we dismiss the emotions as something that's not valid or real, that's like dismissing your heart. If you didn't believe in your heart, you'd likely make some very poor decisions regarding your health, and maybe even place yourself in dangerous situations. We've all been educated enough to know that if we're electrocuted, the heart could stop and we could die. Or that we require our hearts to beat regularly to supply oxygen to the rest of the body so that we can live functionally. The emotions are similar. Emotions are a part of our bodies, and they can be powerful allies. We cannot dismiss them or pretend they don't exist. You couldn't ignore your emotions if you tried. People try to ignore them all the time. People overwork, drug themselves, overeat, starve, obsessively practitioner hop, hurt themselves, hurt others, drive like maniacs, scream at grocery stores, all because they're suppressing or ignoring or not being honest about their emotions. We can see unexpressed emotions all over this country. Emotions require attending and maintenance, just like everything else. They can also guide us into areas of our bodies that require our attention. Befriend your emotional self. Allow your emotions to surface. Allow them to move and exist. When you become acquainted with your emotional self and bring everything into the present, doors open, creativity sparks, and life moves as it should. This is Kate Foley. Thank you for listening.